Game 3 for the Jets is coming up in just a little bit, and you know what? It does kind of feel like a must-win for the Winnipeg Jets. We'll talk about what changes the Jets are going to make on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just really love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, the Jets are going to be playing a pretty critical game tomorrow evening. It is Game 3, of course, against Colorado. And let's be real, right? I don't want to overemphasize things, but in my mind, this is basically a must-win game. I feel like this is probably the one that's going to decide the series. I don't know why I get that vibe, but I just feel like with the past couple of performances from the Jets not being up to par, Winnipeg is kind of needing to be in the driver's seat. And I think if you get one of these first games on the road, suddenly life looks a lot more manageable, right? You want to give yourself breathing room, because if you slip up in the second game, okay, fair enough. You go back home tied 2-2. But I feel like if you're chasing the series, it's just going to lead to more pressure, and it could be harder for this team to claw back from that. Not that they can't, but I just feel like this might be, one of those things where Winnipeg kind of needs to come out of the gate swinging and really steal a huge win on the road. And not just steal, but if they could actually outplay Colorado by a good deal, or even just play evenly, I think we would absolutely all love to see that. Now, before we dive into some changes the Jets are supposedly making, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I have a competitive side, and as a big fan of Monopoly Go, I think you should try it. It's a great mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly. Join your friends and myself and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Now, like I said, the Jets, the past couple of games haven't exactly been great, right? Winnipeg has, quite frankly, been outplayed at 5v5, and, on the power play, unfortunately, the Avs are just better. As much as I would love to say that the Jets' power play has been decent, there were certainly signs in the first game, but the second game, they looked back to being kind of listless. And for the Jets, that's pretty bad, right? Because if you're going to struggle at even strength, then you kind of have to rely on your power play to kind of bridge that gap. And so far, it seems like it's not going to. Even though it didn't score in the first game, it threatened to on a couple of occasions. But for Winnipeg, I think it's just, there's just no real margin for error, I think. And that's the general takeaway I have from this whole series is like the Jets, they really can't afford to be making a lot of mistakes. The first game, they got away with it because Georgiev was atrocious. Second game, he was a lot more stable, I guess. I still don't think he was good. I think his numbers were a little inflated, but if you watched him, he wasn't really secure with the puck. I felt like there were a couple of saves where he just lost track of where the rebound and stuff went. There were opportunities to actually beat him, and I think the Jets probably will rue some of those missed opportunities, especially in the first period when they had like 3 3-on-1s or odd man rushes and capitalized on exactly 0 of them. So there's room here, right? If you get him behind Colorado's defense and stuff, you can actually make some chaos. Now, thankfully, the Jets are going to make a huge change to the back end, bringing back Nate Schmidt into the lineup and flipping Dylan Sandberg back to his natural left side. This is a really big deal because benching Stanley is unfortunately a huge boost for Winnipeg's puck mobility and stuff on the back end. And no disrespect to Stanley, he really lays it all out there. He really tries hard. But I think when it comes to defensive stuff, whether it's clearing the puck out of the defensive zone, making clean breakout passes, all that stuff, you only get it in spurts with him. Whereas with Schmidt, you are generally going to have a pretty stable third pairing D. And with Sandberg, he's generally had pretty good results. Is he offensively inclined? Not necessarily, but I think if you're trying to reduce the number of mistakes that happen in front of Hellebuck, Schmidt or Miller probably was going to be your best option. And I think for the Jets, instead of having two very chaotic blue liners, limiting it to just Pionk at least mitigates some of the damage. I hate to describe it in those terms, but I think that's probably what we're looking at. Now, Bones has kind of played coy as to whether or not he's making any other changes. Up front, though, the forward lines look to be the same, and my guess is that's going to be the same case. I am kind of mystified as to why we haven't seen Cole Perfetti in the series. And look, I get it. People will say that he's a smaller player. He doesn't play playoff hockey, but for one thing, like I said earlier, he's never even been given the chance. So we have no idea what he's like in the postseason. But all I know is that when I look around the league, there's no other team out there that's in the playoffs that's benching a nearly 40-point player. That for me is just mind-blowing, especially when you're looking at how Colorado is just very, very good at matching lines. They just threw out McKinnon for like half the game, and that basically screwed Winnipeg's entire game plan because the Jets were so hell-bent on really hard matching McKinnon to Lowry and Scheifele that it kind of came at the expense of everyone else. So this is a game where they're not going to be able to control the line matches as much, which for the Jets might actually be a benefit. The less Bones has to think about this stuff, the better off the Jets might be, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement in my mind. But hey, at this point, I'm kind of the mind that I'm like less concerned about the process. I do want the Jets to play well, but I think, just surviving this round first is a big step because the Avs might be one of the best teams remaining in the playoff picture. I know no one's technically been eliminated yet, but there's a number of teams that are pretty much on the verge. And honestly, Colorado might be the most stylistically problematic team the Jets are likely to face. Not to say that the Stars or Knights or any team like that wouldn't pose the Jets a huge problem, but the Avs, because of the way that the Jets try to line match and because of how good McKinnon is at breaking open games, on top of the other star talent they have, this is like completely ignoring Rantanen or Makar, Taves, guys like that. I mean, this team is really, really annoying to deal with. And Lehkonen and Nichushkin have been a huge pain in the butt. Those guys have certainly offered supplementary scoring, and then for some reason, Miles Wood is apparently now our kryptonite. I don't know how that happened. The fact that the Jets are not winning any of these matchups is a little concerning. So, the Lowry line has been trying to win those McKinnon matchups, and while I wouldn't say that they won the first game, they definitely slowed him down more than they did in the second game, where McKinnon basically had license to roam. So, for the Jets, this feels like a pretty critical game. I would say, for me, this is going to decide the series, and I think the Jets really need to come in very focused, and we've seen that at times when they've had bad games, they've been able to rebound. I also think the Jets are just going to ask more of Hellebuyck. Connor kind of needs to just be a little bit better. I say that even though he surrendered like 10 goals in 2 games. I think for Helly, some of the goals that he's conceded, they weren't really his fault, right? There's not a lot that he could do. I think on the majority of chances that he's conceded, it's just stuff that Winnipeg really wasn't defending well and kind of left him in no man's land. But by the same token, in a series like this, you kind of have to have him be at his absolute best and steal you a couple of opportunities. And so far, he hasn't been able to do that. Not that I really blame him for it, but I think in this case, the Jets, like I said, really have no margin for error. So everyone has to be giving 100%. Everyone has to be as close to perfect as you're going to get. And I think for Hellebuyck, he'd probably agree. He wants to be better. He wants to be the guy. And I think there's a good chance that he rebounds in this third game. We'll see. Obviously, this is going to be a very difficult assignment. But, for all of the struggles and issues the Jets have had in this series, Winnipeg's not the only one that's kind of in a bit of a hole. A lot of teams in the second and third games have found themselves kind of staring down the barrel of not only a series defeat, but in some cases, a sweep. We'll talk about which teams are in real danger and which ones are perhaps able to come back in some of these series in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Monopoly Go. I am one of those people who is a little bit on the competitive side. I enjoy watching sports. I enjoy it at sometimes doing like backyard football or whatever. Of course, I'll also play some games like, Call of Duty. We all do, right? And it can bring out your really competitive side. But Monopoly Go is a great way to take a classic hit board game and bring it up to the modern era because you can have all sorts of competitions. There's tons of tournaments where you can either compete against your friends or with them. And, it's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great take, making a portable version of the game that everyone loves. And if you are somebody who hates Monopoly, it's probably just because you sucked at it. Let's be real. I think we all know that there was at least one person in every family that always hit you when it came to property rent. But of course, Monopoly Go, because it's digital, offers some really cool stuff. You can play on hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up fantastic cities that bring you big money. But of course, there's a few extra twists, because what is Monopoly Go without a few extra bells and whistles that the classic game does not have? For one thing, you can actually heist your friends' vaults for extra riches, because who doesn't need a little bit of extra spending money? You'll also get leaderboards to find out who the top Monopoly tycoon is. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go right now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode, as we are just talking about some stuff ahead of Game 3 for the Jets. Obviously, like I just alluded to, Winnipeg's not the only team that's kind of looking at a bit of a tough situation. A lot of teams have kind of hit the postseason, and it's not been an ideal run. Just look at the Canucks, right? They've lost Thatcher Demko for the series. Brock Besser took a shot off his hand in practice earlier today. Seth Jarvis and Brett Pesce both appear to have suffered freak injuries for the Canes. It's already looking like a war of attrition, and I think this is where the Jets might actually have an advantage so long as they stay healthy. They also need to survive the Avs, let's be real. But, there's a real road here where the Jets might be able to pull off something miraculous if they play their cards right. But I've focused a lot about the Jets and kind of talked a lot about them. I kind of want to talk about some of the other playoff teams in just a quick moment. Before we go any further, though, wanted to shout out something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. This is for all of you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers. If you have to turn down the volume because they're always shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, in terms of like the opening round of the playoffs, it's been pretty brutal for a lot of teams. Like I just said, a number of early injuries already, and some teams are honestly staring at a bit of a sweep. I did not expect as many sweep situations to emerge on the eastern side of the conference as we're starting to see already. And I'm not going to say that any of these will end in a sweep. There's a good chance that at least one or two of these series end up with the opposing team that's kind of in the hole clawing back a game. But, generally speaking, it seems like a lot of the top teams out in the East aren't going to be spending much time playing in round one because they're going to be done pretty soon. The first series that just hit 3-0 for one team is the Battle of Florida. And as you might expect, it's the Panthers that are in pole position right now. It's been a close series, right? Tampa has played well, but, it all comes down to that last little bit of skill or good fortune or a miraculous save. And I think in that respect, Bobrovsky has just about edged out Vasilevsky, while, Tampa's power play has been a little bit more modest. But we all kind of knew Tampa Bay was in for a tough matchup. The Panthers are one of the top teams in the East. And as much as it bothers me that Paul Maurice is leading his team on to glory and very likely the second round, while the Jets might struggle to get out of their matchup, that side of the table appears to be a lot easier than what the Western Conference has to go through. It's like the difference between like the freaking Krusty Krab and Weenie Hut Jr., man. Like the Eastern Conference looks like a relative cakewalk compared to what you have to do if you're a Central Division team. It is just absolute murder if you're a Western Conference team, which really sucks because as much as like don't want to complain about the playoff structure, it really feels like you have 2 or 3 Stanley Cup quality final matchups, and it's all in one conference, which totally screws the West. But I mean, it just is what it is, right? No use complaining about it. You don't get to pick your opponents. It is what it is. The Florida Panthers might be able to pull off the sweep here in game number 4. That's going to be a tough one, though. I think the Lightning are going to be very desperate. We might see John Cooper pull a rabbit out of his hat and claw back a game or two, but I think in the end, Florida is definitely going to take this one. You've also got the Rangers up 2-0 against the Caps. The Caps have tried to make it interesting at times, but they're just not good. I think no matter what Washington does, they'll always be a step behind. And even if they grab one win over the next 2 games, it really doesn't matter. I think they're pretty much on the outs, and this should be over by Game 5. Carolina looks like it's about to beat the Islanders 4-0, but it's been a little bit close. The Isles have made it more interesting than I think the Canes would like. And, Game 2, they actually very nearly pulled off an upset win in Carolina, which I think would have been a very tough one for Canes fans. But instead, Carolina scored twice in 2 minutes or actually 9 seconds. I'm sorry, 9 seconds to not only tie, but then win the game. So, for the Isles, I mean, this is probably a fair result. They're just not that good. And it seems like Sorokin has kind of struggled recently. He hasn't been himself. And Varlamov, as decent as he's been at times, the Isles just don't have a lot of talent. Let's be real. They're not a great team. And I think that they were a little bit fortunate thanks to the Metro Division being really awful. I think that's what kind of got them through. The series, though, that I think intrigues the most people in the East is Boston-Toronto. That one, Boston leads 2-1, and it kind of feels like the Leafs might be cooked. Nylander is suffering from migraines, possibly as a result of a concussion, which if anyone here is listening and thinks you can play through a migraine or whatever, you just can't. If you've never had one, I pray you never do. It sucks horrendously. Your vision can go blurry. Sometimes you feel like you're about to pass out. It's rough. And anyone playing with a concussion, it's scary business, right? You really don't want to screw around with that. So hopefully Nylander recovers quickly, but my guess is he's going to be out for the series. And that's a huge loss because Auston Matthews is kind of having to carry the offense almost by himself. There's not a lot of forward support there. Certainly they have some great players, but Marner's kind of scuffling. Tavares is decent, but not what he once was. And Nyes, whatever, however you pronounce that, he's only been okay. Bertuzzi and Domi aren't really providing much. So, yeah, I think Toronto is probably staring the barrel of a series loss here, again, to the Bruins. Out west, you have most of the series tied 1-1. The one that I want to spend some time focusing on, and I think that's going to perhaps put a little bit of a fear in all of us as Jets fans, is Vegas-Dallas. The Stars are down 2-0 in the series, and they had home ice advantage, and they have now lost it. I don't want to say that the Stars are going to get swept because I don't think they are. I think they've played well enough to actually be tied in the series or perhaps even in the lead. But look, man, Vegas in the playoffs is just a different beast. When they get their players back, they got Mark Stone back, Tomas Hertl. I mean, this team just patiently waits for the postseason when they can get their stars back off of LTIR, and they just seemingly cook. You've all seen it. You know how this Knights team is. Logan Thompson has stonewalled the Stars, and Ottinger has let in just 1 or 2 more than his opposing numbers. So I don't want to say that your reward for beating the Avs really sucks, but it really sucks. Having to face VGK most likely in the second round is just crappy for the Jets. I know that you have to beat the best to be the best, but if we're talking about the hardest possible road in the playoffs to get to the Cup final, this is it. This foursome of Winnipeg, Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas is basically 3 Cup contenders. Actually, no, sorry, 4 Cup contenders, all vying for 2 spots, and then they have to fight each other for that, Western Conference final seed. So, I mean, this is just brutal, man. And I don't want to belabor the point that it sucks, but yeah. I can't say I feel great about it. After the past couple of games against the Avs, I'm just let's just survive Colorado, see what happens after that. I don't want to say survive because I feel like that's being a little unkind to the Jets, but I mean, unless the Jets massively turn up their 5v5 play, that's kind of what we're talking about. All that said, I will just take it. If they get through Colorado somehow, I don't care. Just do it. I mean, that's all I really am concerned about. Now, I did want to talk about the second round, should the Jets make it, because obviously facing either Dallas or Vegas, 2 very different kinds of teams. But there's a couple of common threads between both that are probably worth tactically game planning for. Not that we're even close to that stage, but you always kind of have to look ahead, right? Because the league moves quickly, and 70% of teams that win game 1 in these series tend to advance. So assuming that the Jets pull off that feat and maintain the trend, they're going to have to face an equally tough opponent in round number 2. We'll talk about what you might expect from that second round matchup in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team too? If you're building your talented roster, you need to go with Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates who might match your qualifications, but honestly might not be the absolute best fit, right? You want to find a really good candidate pool that meets all of your job expectations and requirements, and you want it fast, right? Indeed offers a great matching service and offers tons of powerful tools like matching, assessments, and virtual interviews. So you find those candidates that fit your job requirements as much as possible, as quickly as possible. It's a great service. And as somebody who has actually used Indeed when I was looking for work a while back, it's a great site. They offer tons of very easy-to-use tools, a step-by-step process that lets you build your resume. And so for business owners who are looking to hire really talented employees, I feel like this place has to be your choice. I mean, Indeed is fantastic. It's used by 3 million businesses, over 3 million businesses worldwide. It's a great service. And I know that, for those of you who have to pinch pennies and stuff, Indeed totally gets it, right? They know that when you're growing your own business, you can't just afford to fire money into the sun. So that's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. To get started, visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring right now. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are closing out for a couple of final thoughts ahead of, well, maybe round 2. Obviously, the Jets are in a bit of a tight spot with Colorado. I'm not going to lie. The first couple of games have not exactly been great. But, for the Jets, let's just assume they beat Colorado, right? If that happens, and, I would actually say that history tends to favor that result. Not going to say it is going to happen because I think Colorado's kind of proven they're a lot better than you might think. Certainly better than the regular season record, but let's be real, they've kind of dominated most of these games. I think the Jets have had some stretches where they've been the dominant team, especially when they've been able to get behind Colorado's defense. But otherwise, right, the Avs are just they have that McKinnon guy who kind of breaks their matchups, right? Do they have that with the Stars and Vegas Knights? I don't think so, right? I think both of those teams are more of a depth proposition than the Knights or than the Avs are. Colorado is very much a top-heavy team where the top is so good that it kind of does enough to sort of paper over the depth, right? I think the Jets ideally would have been able to match up a little bit more evenly, but so far that's not really been the case. Lowry and Scheifele are having to do so much heavy lifting in the hard matches against McKinnon, and they're losing those battles. And then the depth lines for the Colorado Avalanche then beat up on the Jets' depth lines, which isn't really ideal. With Dallas and Vegas, I think you're looking at two teams that have a more, I would say, balanced approach, right? They're very skilled. They're very good. I think if I'm looking at which team scares me the most, it's probably Vegas. Vegas has this innate ability to just materialize goals with really good one-touch quick passing. They're a great team that has fantastic vision. They seemingly understand space at a very scary level. Whenever you watch their zone entries and stuff, this is a team that is like mechanically sound. They're very good at rapidly stretching, defensive structures apart, and they just know how to pick apart those seams and create chaos down low. They're a fantastic team. They're one of those squads that I think could probably match up against the Avs pretty well. I think it'd be a very close series. I still think Colorado might be able to win that matchup, but for the Jets, right, the Jets have had some games against Vegas in the past that have not gone well, and I can't say that I think it would be all that different this time, but Winnipeg is also a lot deeper than it's been in previous years. If the Jets are playing a game against a team that's going to roll 4 lines, the Jets might actually be able to match up against that better. I know Winnipeg has also struggled against Dallas this year. I know the last game they played against Dallas, they kind of whooped them, but I don't expect that to be the case if the Jets are facing the Stars in round 2. Both the Knights and Stars are really deep. They're very skilled, and they've had some pretty decent playoff experience between the two of them. The Stars not that long ago made a Cup Finals. Vegas won the Cup last year. So we're talking about a couple of teams that are just very experienced, very deep. And what kind of irritates me with the Stars is they just continue to add really talented younger players like Stankoven and, of course, Robertson, who's been a fixture now for a couple of seasons. Heiskanen, of course, veteran young D now, who's just a monster. It's just tough, right? The only thing that I think the Jets could really lean on, and I know it sounds really stupid saying this when you look at Hellebuck's record the past couple of games, but the guys in net are a mismatch when it comes to Connor Hellebuck, right? And that's historically. Hellebuck in the playoffs, it's been a little more chaotic, so I don't know how much I want to lean on that, but if I'm going to have to put my faith in one goalie out of all of them to perhaps pull through in a game, I guess I'm going to throw my weight behind Helly. I feel like he is the guy that I still I'm just going to have to trust him, right? I think we all kind of have to agree that, like, sometimes you just got to go with your guy. I know people have talked about Brossoit perhaps starting, and I think the problem with that is, he's not going to handle the chaos well. I've watched Brossoit a lot, and I think in some ways, when it comes to the chaos down low, he's constantly swimming in his crease and rolling around, and it's just not great. I think it's the kind of thing where, Colorado, Vegas, and Dallas would feast on that stuff, especially because, like, the Jets don't really clear the crease all that well. Hellebuck has been able to use his size and reflexes to sort of block second chance opportunities, but if we're being honest, I don't know that Brossoit is necessarily going to be able to do that. He's great. I love him, and he's been a fantastic backup. Would not recommend starting him unless it gets to a really desperate situation. So, a lot of stuff to consider, but at the end of the day, this is the price you pay. The Jets punched their ticket. They've got to prove that they're capable of hanging with these top teams. And look, maybe they come out of the series and they're ready for a big round 2 against either of Dallas or Vegas. If it's the Knights and the Jets were to actually beat the Knights, I can guarantee you might as well have a Stanley Cup parade, because that's probably the closest thing the Jets have to the Stanley Cup at this point. Is beating Vegas. The Knights have been our boogeyman for years. They keep knocking us out of the playoffs, and every time they do, they've made the Cup Finals. It hasn't happened a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. So let's hope that it's not a third time, right? And let's hope that the Jets actually get out of round 1 first before they start to think about round 2. But you always got to be prepared for the eventualities, right? I guess if there's any small comfort, all the series on the Pacific side, for the most part, are a little bit chaotic. Compared to this side of the bracket, the Central is just an absolute slog. You have basically all of the best Western teams all in one group. So if you survive this, you might just about survive anything. But hockey's chaotic. It's weird. Let's hope that the Jets get weird with it and actually pull out a big series win against Colorado so that they can get the chance to advance past round 2. We'll see how this goes. Obviously, the Jets have a late game tomorrow, so I may start to record an episode and have like some early thoughts from the game, but probably won't have a full recap until the following week, at which point we'll have also Game 4 on the Sunday. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Cross your fingers. Let's hope for a big Jets win. Let me know your score predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. I'm going to be dumb and say Jets 4-3. I have no evidence for this, no backing, no history. Let's just go with vibes. I'm hoping for a big Jets win. Let me know your predictions. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. As always, have a great night and go Jets go.